Okay, we are live. Welcome everybody to join us in this first live chat about the GrowBot's project. Here we are with Barbara Mazzolai, the project coordinator and research director at the Italian Institute of Technology, and with Telmo Piovani, our guest, philosopher and historian of science and professor at University of Padova. My first question is for Barbara. Barbara, GrowBot is a project which wants to study plants, climbing plants, in order to understand their behavior and then reproduce in robotic systems. What features do you want to study? How and what would be the robotics, the robots?
Hi Valeria, hi Telmo, and hello to everybody. We select the climbing plants because they show some features that are quite unique in the plant kingdom and are very relevant also in robotics. First of all, climbing plants they don't have a very sophisticated root apparatus or trunk, but they use the other plants or vertical walls, poles to anchor their body to sustain their weight. And this way, they use much energy for growing faster with respect to the other plants. It's a real competition for resource, for light. And doing that, they adapt their morphology, their body, to the external conditions. So they show very high plasticity. And this is exactly what we want to investigate and imitate for developing growing robots. In particular, what is relevant for us is investigating the way in which they find the support. For example, by these circumnutation movements that they are very exaggerated oscillatory movements that they use to find the support, but also they anchor the body by developing spines, dizzy pads, tendrils, twining structures. And so what we are doing is investigating the biomechanics properties of the materials, the structures, and then the way in which they find the support that is not mediated by vision, but mainly by touch and other sensing properties. So we are studying the behaviors, the strategies, as I said, in adapting to very dynamically changing conditions. This is the goal. And in this way, we propose actually a completely new paradigm in robotics, which is moving by growing. So what we are doing is developing growing robots that can adapt their morphology to the external environment. They can negotiate voids, and also they can explore a very unstructured environment, a very narrow environment. So they can be very competitive with more traditional robots that are based on wheels or legs and they fall down in certain conditions. So this is why we are investigating climbing plants.
So plants are really a fascinating word, but tell me, scientists, when did they start to understand the plant kingdom?
First of all, hello to everybody, and hello to Barbara and you, and thanks for this invitation and for the pleasure to talk with you and with our audience. It's not so easy to answer because we usually think that animals like us and plants are two completely separated kingdoms, but it's not true because we have a common ancestor with plants, a unicellular organism, eukaryotic organism, something like that, living on Earth around 1 billion years ago. So this is why we should not be surprised by the fact that we, as human beings, we share more than 40% of our DNA with plants, which is normal because we had a common ancestor. We are related, and we share the same basic genetic and molecular mechanisms. So I think that science learned really to understand the importance of plants only after Darwin, only after the great idea of the tree of life and what we call today phylogeny. So the idea that we have common ancestors enlarging and correlating every organisms and human beings included. So the Darwinian message is great because it's the message of the unity into the diversity, unity and diversity. And of course, is the idea that diversity is a great resource also for imagination, for inspiration, for imitation. And this is also the reason why plants have and evolved different adaptations with respect to us. And this is the reason why we can get inspiration from their evolutionary strategies. And as Barbara and her team do very well in this GrowBot project. I have a surprise for you. It's not a digital surprise because for the people uh, listening for us, this is the original first copy of the Italian edition of a wonderful book, not so well known in Darwinian bibliography. It is the book related to the movements and habits of climbing plants. A small but plenty of ideas, a book written by a quite old Darwin and right at the end of his life. And you can find here exactly this idea that we should understand adaptations evolved by climbing plants, movements, habits, and the fact that maybe they used already existing parts for new functions. In this book, Darwin explained that you have to study even so apparently marginal organisms like climber plants because they have very important evolutionary lessons related to the graduality, continuity of change in evolution. And I'm very happy to announce that together with Barbara at the Botanical Garden in Padua, we are trying to repeat for the first time the original experiments produced by Darwin in his wonderful greenhouse in Down House in Kent. And we are trying to reproduce and repeat exactly in the same conditions his experiments in order to see from an historical point of view if they were so accurate as we think, and also to rethink in molecular terms his idea and his insights about the mechanisms of climbing for plants. So it's a very interesting project between history of science and experimental science.
And we would say also for the future, Barbara, what do you think? Also for the future of robotics.
Absolutely, this is fantastic because in our robot we want to implement exactly as I said, an adaptation capability from living organism, of course. But plants are amazing in that, because they are completely different from animals. They have to stay in the place they are sessile, and so in this way they have to use in the best way the resources that they have. So they implement completely different strategies, and so we can take inspiration from the way in which they save energy, in which they adapt the morphology, in the materials that are fundamental, the biomechanics. So we can develop a completely new artifact, starting from not only from a hardware point of view, but also in terms of behavior, in terms of intelligence that is distributed in the body. So it's a completely different paradigm with respect to animals. So there are not brain, of course, in plants, but the sensing perception, the sensing are distributed in the body, and the same, the capability to take, if you want, a decision or adaptation to the environment. So we can really change the way, in which we explore and we study plants, and I think that the combination between experts like Telmo and roboticists can also help each other, because by using technology we can also use the robots for validating some hypotheses, and at the same time we can develop robots that are more adapted to move, to act in a real environment. So there is this double, if you want, advantage.
I have to say, Valeria, that it's great because in Darwin book, one of the most important concepts is that he's writing that climbing plants are very efficient organisms because they use the minimal quantity of energy and material in order to adaptively reach the scope, reach the purpose. So that reaching light and resources and following gravity, force, and so on. So it's exactly one of the main original ideas of Darwin, this adaptive efficiency of climate.
So, as you told, we have physics, but we have biology, we have evolution, new materials, energy, a lot of fields coming together for understanding the plant kingdom. So, it's a sort of multidisciplinary domain. How much this affects? I mean,
I think that this is fundamental. Also in our project, there are people that come from different disciplines. This is fundamental because we start from the key principle, and so we need first to analyze the key principle that allow, in this case, climbing plants to be so effective and efficient in their environments. But at the same time, we need biologists. And then we need to translate this principle in design. So we need people that are expert in computer science, we need mathematicians, we need engineers, but also expert, as I said, in material, in biology, in physics, and so on. And this is a big challenge because this means that people need to be open to understand different disciplines, and it's a great challenge. It's not easy at all, but it's the foundation, it's the pillar for this kind of a project, because otherwise we cannot address this complex problem like investigating natural organisms just with one discipline. At least not in these days. Probably Darwin or other scientists like Leonardo da Vinci, they concentrate a lot of knowledge and experience, but now we need really different competence to work together.
And Telmo, for you is the same?
Yes, it's the same. I agree. But I have to add that I think that there are two ways to deal with multidisciplinarity. The first one is something like a wishful thinking. So, okay, we have different independent disciplines, and we like them to dialogue with each other. And the second one is much more interesting. It's not a wishful thinking. It's an operational way to think about multidisciplinarity, an a priori way. So it means if we don't put together data and different evidence from different disciplines, we are not able to understand a scientific problem. So now in many fields of science, multidisciplinarity is not wishful thinking. It's something absolutely necessary in order to have good models. And evolution is a wonderful example about that. Evolution has a great range of evidence to deal with. You have to think that evolutionary biology ranges from fossils to molecules, from phenomena related to millions of years ago, and phenomena related to bacteria in a lab evolving in 20 minutes. So you have a very, very heterogeneous range of data, and you have to understand and to propose a frame for such different evidence. So multidisciplinarity is intrinsically connected to evolution. But I have to say another point, that multidisciplinarity, in my view, is an heuristic approach. It means that, let's take the example of biorobotics. Biorobotics is soft robotics, and biorobotics are inspired by adaptations that we see in nature, animals and plants. So we think that robotics has to learn from nature. But it's also true the reverse, because thanks to robotics, thanks to the fact that we can engineer a system, we can understand much better the biological system. So it's a reciprocal approach, a heuristical approach. Biorobotics learns from nature, and that we study nature as biologists and as evolutionists, we can learn from robotics in order to better understand our system. So it's an interesting relationship.
Barbara, is what you are doing in your boat as well, you are studying plants for engineering the robotic system, but then you are understanding something more about the plants.
Yeah, exactly. This is our vision, our approach. So from one side, of course, we want to develop a new artifact to solve some problems, so to help the humans in different contexts and exploration, environmental monitoring, agriculture. So there are many aspects, rescue. There are many applications that we have in mind. But at the same time, especially as a biologist, because this is my background, this is one of my dreams. In the future, I see these robots used for scientists to validate, especially behavioral aspects or evolutionary aspects, that you can isolate the information that you want to validate in the robot. And of course, this is not for all. Genetics cannot be probably not for the moment investigated with the robots, but behavioral and adaptation capability can be really in some way, especially if the robots are designed starting from the biological principles. So this is a fundamental, and this is why we need to collaborate starting from the beginning with the expert. Because the robot need to embed this principle in the design. So this is fundamental. We lost Valeria. Valeria disappeared. But in any case, I think that this is now one of the challenge of our work. So try, as we said with the Telmo, try to understand each other, because we talk a lot in these days about multidisciplinarity, but then the way in which we can implement multidisciplinarity in our work is not simple. And there is not a book that you can open and see how we can collaborate or translate a design principle in robots, in artifacts. But this is what we like to do. So for the future, collaborate more and more with the expert, with biologists and so on.
Yeah, if you see the most important papers that are published today in Science, Nature, the most important journals, the more provocative are quite always published by interdisciplinary teams now. In evolution, this is absolutely fundamental.
No.
And now you announce a new collaboration between philosopher and historian and scientist. This is another step of multidisciplinary. I have a last question for you. If we reflect a little bit on plants, we clearly see there is a lesson. There is an interconnection between human earth life and nature. So maybe there will be something more that we can learn for the future, for having a sustainable future where the environment will be at the focus of science, but also on other human activities. What are, for you, the main lessons we should learn?
I go. If we consider the artificial world, we can really design new robots, more sustainable, take inspiration by living organisms, but especially by plants. As Telmo said, the first lesson that we are trying to implement, in our robot is the energy point, how to save energy, because in robotics we know that this is a very crucial aspect. Our robots consume a lot of energy and they cannot be used for a long period in a real environment. So this is the first point, how to implement an integrated design in our robot, use the multifunctional properties of the materials, like in plants, that they show several passive movements or the capability to move by interacting with a changing conditioned environment, like humidity, temperature. And this is due to the arrangement of the materials in the walls. So we can really consider new materials with functionality implemented in the structure, so they can play as a sensor and the motor as an actuator at the same time. And also, as I said before, this distributed intelligence is another point. So we don't need to concentrate the control from a robotics point of view, but we can distribute it in the body, especially, and this is very important, when the complexity of the body increases, in fact. It's also evident in other in animals like octopus or other kind of animals that they have a very complex body, and so probably just a brain is not enough. So you need to have a distributed control, and this is exactly what we want to learn from plants. And the network that they establish with other plants, with other organisms, because this is another way to exchange information, exchange materials, exchange energy as well. So there are many aspects that we're trying to investigate to develop a robot that are more sustainable and, very important, integrated in the natural context. This is the future from my point of view. Not only robots from a natural organism, but robots for nature that are more integrated in the natural environment, the natural context. So we reduce the impact of this technology. Is a sort of cycle of life, you know? And so also the robot at a certain point should disappear after they perform the task in the environment. This is the goal, the final goal.
Also, in terms of waste, you are very interested also in this aspect.
Exactly. This is one of the points. So material at a certain point should be biodegradable or a less impact on the environment. And this is something that people that develop technology have to consider more and more.
And Telmo, for you?
I reply for the other side of the question, so the sustainability, because I say that in the standard narrative, we always say that we have domesticated plants, and that's true, of course, through artificial selection in different parts of the world. We selected a very teeny part of the biodiversity of plants, and we gave a lot of Darwinian success to a few species of plants. But we quite always we forget that there is the other side of the story, the reverse story. So the plants domesticated us in evolutionary terms, because thanks to plants we breathe, we eat, we medicate ourselves thanks to chemical compounds from plants, we dress ourselves through banks, cosmetics and materials, we build houses, we write on papers, we travel on rubber material, and so on. So plants represent our ecological, of course, but even our cultural niches. And we know that we evolve through a continuous relationship together with our ecological and cultural niches. So that's the main general point. This is also the reason why, for example, plants, we worked for a project for Expo about that. The plants are very frequently models of sustainability, because we can use quite everything of some plants. Nothing is thrown away and everything is useful. So in the history of native people, the use of plants is a very good example of sustainability. And finally, I'd say that we should love and respect plants. So for ethical reasons, because we have no right to destroy them and to extend plants, but also we have to love and respect plants for human survival. And we had an example this year with pandemics. There is a relationship, because the question is, where do pandemics come from? And the answer is they from the spillover of viruses from animals to humans. And where do these virus carrying animals live? In the primary forest. So if we destroy plants, if we deforest, we increase the likelihood of future pandemics like COVID-19. So there's also a connection between us and biosphere, and the connection is made mainly through plants.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's really, really important also to underline this aspect, this pandemic, and the relationship that humans have today with nature. Thank you. I think that we have done. Our time is over. I don't see questions from the public. So I don't know.
Not so far,
Not
but
so
we have
far.
email, and they can email us.
Yeah, maybe later during the future days, some people will comment and I will send you the questions so that you can answer. So I want to thank you, really. Thank you very much. And I hope the public will keep follow us in the future for other live events related to GrowBot's.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.